am privileged to be the executive director of NCDVD, which is, in fact, as Rick said, tasked with the ongoing formation and training of the diocesan vocation directors. But equally important to us is also their continual spiritual formation, which is why Serra, right from the get-go, is so important to partnering with NCDVD. For a number of years now, through the gift of fellow Serrans such as yourself, we have been able to offer at our annual conference each year, all-day adoration. And we're going to talk a little bit about the power of that later on in my talk, but that is very significant for these vocation directors and their staff who come to our programming, to know that there are those who are journeying with them in this beautiful ministry, in this sacred ministry of vocations, even though they don't necessarily know you by name, or even maybe not even know you by face, but they know you're out there praying. And to know that you are literally with them in a convention center, sitting before the Lord through adoration, is a gift that we cannot even begin to thank you for. So I just wanted to make sure I did say that out loud. Judy mentioned earlier, I don't know who heard it or who didn't, but we're going to be in Minnesota the end of this summer with our new men. And Sarah's going to be there, as you always are, being able to help us offer the all-day adoration. So again, thank you to everyone who will be praying with us on site, and for those of you who will hopefully be praying with us from home. What I'd like to say is that I am not an expert in vocations. I've been doing this for 18 years, and anyone who tells you that they're an expert in the ministry of vocations doesn't know what they're talking about. And why do I say that? Because it's an ongoing journey. Times change, people change, needs change. And so we constantly need to change with that. It doesn't mean everything changes. When we talk about Serra Spark, there are programs that Serra has offered and trained vocation directors to use over the years that are as valuable today as they were 15 years ago. But we always need to be aware of the way the Lord is calling young people and be prepared to journey with them, perhaps in a new way. What I'd like to start with is a little video, because it's going to remind us of what we're talking about. This video is going to feature Monsignor James Mcdonald, who sadly we lost 2 years ago. Monsignor did not have 16 degrees, although the bishop would say he had a PhD in priesthood. He just was everything you would think of when it came to priesthood. And what he would say to those who were discerning when he had a chance to meet with them is just get down on your knees and pray to the Blessed Mother, and she never once will let you down. So just join me in listening to Monsignor Mcdonald for a moment.
Monsignor James Mcdonald, pastor of St. Aidan's in Williston Park. I became a priest because God wanted it, and I responded. It would have been hard to tear me away from being a priest. I wanted it so badly. Well, I didn't hear God say anything, but I was fascinated with the idea of celebrating Mass, hearing confessions, and I would say acting for Christ and doing good for people. Sort of a difficult question, because it's something that has been almost so much a part of my life that I never even really thought about it like that. It was always there. It was natural to me. The church was just always part of my life. Everything in my life was associated with the church. My parents were associated with the church. My sister, my brothers, my whole life was bound up with the church. I think about the church all the time. I love the church. You know what I would say? Probably something that some might consider old-fashioned or corny, but I would say the most important thing is getting to heaven. That's what I would say to them. The most important thing. Even though it may not seem so when you're 17, 18, 16, or whatever, that is the most important thing, to get to heaven and have a relationship with Jesus Christ. Yes, to know that you can never lose him and you only grow in love of him. And the warmth and the security and the peace, the tranquility, whatever you want to call it, of knowing God and knowing that you are perfectly loved and perfectly understood.
I think that we can end the talk right there, right? That is not just priesthood. That is the essence of the sacredness of vocations. The sacredness of vocation ministry is rooted in the very conversations people will have with those who are longing to understand, God, what is it that you are calling to do in my life? The sacredness is there in the accompaniment. It is there in the prayer. It's there in the support. It's there in the invitation. But if young people do not understand church, if they do not understand why we are here, where we are journeying to, they're never really going to understand the power of discernment. I'm going to tell you things that you already know, so simply consider them reminders. What is the purpose of our vocation? The purpose of our vocation, if we answer yes to the vocation God is calling us to, it's our easiest way to heaven. It's not necessarily an easy way, but it is the easiest way. It is the way the Lord has designed for us to get home to him. The work of vocations is also working with those people who feel this restlessness in their heart, this emptiness, and they don't quite know what it is or how to fill it. There's no app, if you will, that's going to give them that instantaneous and long-lasting satisfaction like the Eucharist. So the beauty of Serra and Serra Spark particularly, and NCDVD, some might say, well, does our partnership really make a difference? Yes, it does really make a difference. A discerner needs to hear voices of all generations, not just their generation. We have all, I'm sure, experienced or can imagine a situation where we're at home and maybe we've told a child or a grandchild something 4 times and they don't react. And another member of the family comes in and says exactly the same thing and they jump to their feet and you're like, really? You're killing me here because I just said the same thing. But they heard it in a different way, or the other person had a different perspective. And so many voices saying the same thing, but perhaps in a little bit of a different way, can help those who are discerning move to the next step. At some point, you need to look someone in the eye, call them by name, and encourage them to at least consider discerning their vocation. A few years ago, the USCCB did a survey of never married Catholics. And the purpose of the survey was to see if we could ascertain if any of them had really considered perhaps a vocation to priesthood or religious life. And if they had, were there some reasons why they didn't move forward, or just trying to get a sense of where we were at. And an interesting point of the survey, which we didn't anticipate was going to come up, but it did, was the power of invitation. And we found that it took a minimum of 3 times for someone to be invited to consider a vocation for them to take that consideration seriously. Here's my analogy. You're at church on Sunday and you're there perhaps with your son or daughter, and you say to them, they have a particularly good voice, Mary, why aren't you in the church choir? You have a great voice. And Mary will roll her eyes and say, Mom, you're just your mom, right? And then maybe a week later, Mary will run into one of your friends, maybe at the market or maybe even after church on Sunday. And they will say, Mary, I've been meaning to tell you, I heard you singing at Mass the other day. You have a beautiful voice. You should consider being in the choir. And again, Mary will roll her eyes and say, well, that's just my mother's friend. And of course, my mother put her up to it. But maybe a month or 2 later, Mary is at another parish, maybe in another diocese, at maybe a wedding, and she's singing in the pew with people she doesn't know. And after Mass, someone says to her, wow, you have a beautiful voice. Do you sing in your church choir? Now Mary says, maybe I really should think about singing in the church choir. It's a simple analogy, but it's similar in the world of vocations. Take priesthood in religious life. When you're invited to a sacred marriage, it's an easier yes, right? It's an easier yes. It's something that we can all envision. But saying yes to God if he's calling you to be a priest, or saying yes to God if he's calling you to join a religious community as a man or woman, sometimes we find that's not as easy a yes. And so having people invite them to consider becoming a priest or religious, you don't know if you're going to be the first invitation or the third invitation. So next time you see someone who has some of the qualities, not all, there's only one person who had all of them, Jesus himself, right? But it's someone who has some of the qualities you would like to see in a priest or religious, invite them to take that into consideration. So can you really make a difference? Yes, you can make a huge difference. We know, and we say it all the time, that prayer is the single most important thing that anyone can do for vocations. To pray for others' vocations, to pray for the generosity of yourself, to accept that if someone in prayer has yet said yes to God to a particular vocation, and it's not the vocation you really wanted them to have, that you have the generosity to say, okay, God, I don't really understand what you're doing here, but I know it came from prayer. So now I need to pray for me. So I have the generosity to say yes. I was recently blessed to meet with a mother whose daughter was called to religious life. And the mom was really thrilled until she realized that her daughter was called to a cloistered community. And that was heartbreaking for the mother, because she was like, how am I going to do this? You know, I won't be able to talk to my daughter on a regular basis or see her, all the time. But she took it to prayer and she took it to the Blessed Mother. And it's a work in progress, but she's making a lot of progress on that. But yes, you can make a difference by praying for both those who are discerning and the family and friends of those, so that they can support them and come to terms with it. Because sometimes it's not easy. So let's talk a little bit about the language of vocation. Now, if there is an expert in the room, I'm talking to you, Serra. Serra is an expert in the room when it comes to talking about the language of vocation, but let's just go through it a little bit. Let's talk about, why do you need to support someone else's vocation? Well, if we talk about the vocation of marriage, right? We know that in a sacred marriage, the purpose of the vocation is for me to get my husband to heaven and for my husband to get me to heaven, right? That's the power of our vows. That is what sacred marriage is about. We need to understand as Catholics each vocation and the purpose of it. And so therefore, when we are talking to people, especially in today's society that is attacking our Catholic faith, attacking our Catholic values, and most specifically attacking our vocations, both in marriage, priesthood, and religious life, we really need to understand what we're talking about, so we're in a better position to talk to our friends and neighbors about it. Priesthood. Priesthood, I will say, and yes, full disclosure, I am the mother of a priest, 4 years this June. I have 3 other beautiful children who remind my husband and I that they have 3 other beautiful children, not just their son who's a priest, all right? But being a priest is the single hardest job on the planet. Many of you on this call probably have met me or have heard me speak in another venue. For some of you, it may be the first time you're hearing me, but let me be very clear. Don't ask Rose Sullivan her opinion, because she's going to give it to you, right? My priests who I have the privilege to journey with know that as well. And what I remind them of, especially as vocation directors, they have one job, to save my soul, to get me to heaven, to serve the people that God has placed before them, not the people that he wishes God placed before him, the people that God's actually ordained him to serve. They are the gatekeepers as vocation directors. They are the gatekeepers as to when someone is discerning that sacred vocation of priesthood, are they in fact being called? It's a hard, hard job as a vocation director. Some will be called to be a religious brother or a religious priest. And thank goodness for our religious brothers and religious priests who are out there. They're amazing. These happen to be the CFRs, but there's the Dominicans and the Marymount missionaries. There's so many. One thing that really kind of like irks me a little bit is when I meet people and they'll meet someone who's a brother and they mean it sincerely, but they're like, well, why isn't he a priest? Did he not finish his studies? Well, no, God didn't call him to be a priest. You know, we can't all be everything. I sometimes I say to my priests, we can't all be priests. If we were all priests and none of us were parents, there would be no one for you to serve, right? So you each need to remember God calls each individual person, and if in their generosity and prayer life, they say yes to what God has called them to, they are on the road where they are meant to be. Which brings us to our beautiful brides of Christ, right? That happens to be my granddaughter sitting with Sister Joseph Andrew from the Ann Arbor Dominicans. In my family, it's priesthood. That's what I've been doing. It's been doing it for so long, but I do have two daughters. And I remember one time I said to them, you know, I just realized everything we do is priesthood, seminarians. Have I ever said out loud to you, girls, are you considering that maybe God's calling you to be a religious sister or a nun? And my youngest said to me, Mom, you can't be a Sullivan and not have thought about being a religious sister or nun. But when is the last time your friends and families have openly talked about what it means to be a religious sister, nun, brother, or priest? It should not be a left-hand turn in the conversation. It should not be Vocation Sunday. It should not be the one day of the year that the DRE says, well, this is going to be the day we do the vocation talk. It should be intertwined and interwoven into every conversation that we do. It's like in Catholic school, right? The beauty of Catholic education, and I know I'm looking at educators right here in my gallery, you know, Judy and Ann, right? The beauty of Catholic education is I can talk about God when I'm talking about science. I can talk about God when I'm talking about history. Same thing needs to be true about the language of vocations. It needs to be infused in the everydayness of what you do. So these are some things, and I'd be happy, John, to send them over to you. You can send them out. This happens to be from catholicextension.org. And it's just some typical vocabulary words when you're talking about priesthood and religious life. And perhaps some of them you know already, but perhaps some of them you're like, I'm never really clear what is perpetual vows, what are temporary vows, what's the difference between a nun and a sister, all right? So there's some great vocabulary words. How do you become a priest? How do you become a sister or a brother? It's those steps on the way. Like for priesthood, it's a little bit more familiar to us because it's more publicly viewed. You usually can see it on your diocesan website, or before COVID, we had the privilege of going to the cathedral or the seminary to pray and participate as the men went through the various steps, eventually being ordained to a transitional deacon and then priest. But with religious life, that it's not as public, all right? And so understanding what is the difference between a postulant and then a novice and so forth, these would be important for you to become familiar with. And why? It goes to a credibility factor. Don't tell someone you know everything about vocations if you're not familiar with the language. It is, however, okay to say, that's a great question. I always get confused between the two. I don't know the answer, but I'm going to get back to you on that, right? So always be honest when you're talking to someone about the different steps when it comes to vocation work. This is always my favorite one, the difference between a sister and a nun. They are not, in fact, the same, right? So nuns live in a monastery. Nuns are, often cloistered. Sisters are probably with the type of religious women that we most encounter, all right, in our everydayness, in our parishes, if we still are blessed to have them living with us. But perhaps some are working on the chancery level, but that is the difference between sisters and nuns. So the importance of lending your voice to Christ. You could say, well, I'm not the vocation director. And I'm going to say, well, no, you're wrong. We are all vocation directors. The bishop, if you want to talk about canon law, the bishop, canonically speaking, is the vocation director of your diocese. The diocesan bishop then appoints what you and I think of as the vocation director, the priest vocation director of your diocese. He's technically the agent of the bishop. And yes, he doesn't have an easy job. He does not have an easy job at all. But he also cannot be out there in the weeds. You are. You're the ones who are out there at Mass on Sunday, daily Mass if you have the honor and privilege to be able to have that time in your schedule to go to daily Mass, or you're involved with Serra. Maybe there's different events you're doing. And you can see those young people who are regularly involved. Even, and I always say to people, look outside the boundaries of your church. If this weekend you're going to the art show, if it's happening in your state or town or the county fair, or I know we're all starting to open up with COVID, but if you see people from your community and that young man is extraordinarily kind, or he's the first one to jump up to help move the table, it has nothing to do on the periphery of Catholic faith. It has everything to do with being a good and honest son or daughter of God. You might want to mention his name to your parish priest, right? So you don't have to feel like, oh, I don't know what the requirements are to get into seminary. I don't know what the requirements are to join the convent. You don't need to. But it's sort of like when you see something, say something. I think it's the best phrase that we've come up with. We've used it so many different ways, right? As a society. Well, let's use that for Jesus. When you see someone that you think has a vocation to a particular call, then make sure you let your parish priest know. Calling on the church to create the conditions that will permit many young people to say yes in generous response to God's loving call. The Pope recommended Scripture, prayer, and the Eucharist as the most valuable means enabling us to grasp the beauty of a life spent fully in the service of the kingdom. And this was by Pope Benedict in 2012 for the World Day of Prayer for Vocations, which is held on Good Shepherd Sunday. We have at the USCCB for many years engaged with CARA, which is the statistical organization of the Catholic Church, and they do what is known as the CARA report. And recently, they've also started doing this report for those who are professed for religious life, but traditionally it had always been for diocesan priesthood. Although sometimes we add new questions, we ask the same questions each year because we want to track it and see what has changed. We have some basic questions like the average age. So right now, the average age of the men who are being ordained is in their 30s, and it's actually getting a little bit lower, a little bit younger, right? Because they're saying yes a little bit sooner. For a while there, they were in their mid-30s. And we may ask, if they were born in the United States, and if not, what countries. But one of the most interesting areas that I find in my work in diocesan vocations is prayer practices before they started seminary. So what were the things you were engaging in before you started your seminary formation program? And this has remained consistent, I think, at least 10 or 12 years. And 77%, it's Eucharistic adoration. 77% of the men who got ordained this year in 2021 said Eucharistic adoration was one of their most powerful prayer experiences in their discernment to their vocation to priesthood. Right next to it, tied right next to it, was praying the rosary. So praying the rosary, Eucharistic adoration. I tease vocation directors and I say, if you are not including praying the rosary and Eucharistic adoration in the events that you're offering to the men in your diocese, you're missing the boat, because we literally gave you the roadmap. They're telling you what they're doing, right? But here are some other things that you may find of interest, and it goes back to, can you really make a difference in the parish? Sure. Did you know that 49% of this year's ordination class were active in their parish youth group? That's why parish youth group programs are important. That is why healthy parish youth group programs are significantly important. 32% of them were campus ministers or youth group ministers themselves. 29% first considered priesthood when they were in elementary school, and 32% first considered priesthood when they were in high school. That means 61% of this year's ordination class considered priesthood before they even got to college. So they're making those decisions, even though they wouldn't necessarily articulate it as they would later on in life when they look back on it. Like if you remember the video, one of the first questions we asked Monsignor Mcdonald, when did you first think about being a priest? And he said, that's a hard question to ask, right? Because he couldn't really remember. But a lot of these men will say it was back in elementary school and high school. And why is that important? Because they're coming to church, and they're coming to church on Sunday because mom and dad are bringing them to church on Sunday, right? And you as a community will continue to have an impact on them. Where do you think their vocations have been fed during those younger years? From you. From you. Your witness, your devotion to the Lord. Right now, we are so encouraged, actually, with Bishop Cousins, who is the chairman of the Committee on Evangelization with the Eucharistic Revival that he's taking under his wing. So please keep him and his committee in your prayers. And this, as you probably know, is as a direct result of the Pew Research study that had stated that far too many Catholics no longer believe in the true presence of the Lord. When a young person sees you genuflect and give reverence before the tabernacle, when a young person sees you come into church and mid-conversation and suddenly stop talking, right? They know something is happening. So they may not be able to understand it and articulate it, but they realize there's a powerful presence. And what can I do to learn more about this is what they're saying to you. So the Lord says, come and follow me. But what does that really mean? It means you want to say to the people and young men and women you're journeying with that they need to put God first. We all need to put God first, right? My husband and I teach pre-canon. We always say it's a crowded marriage, but God's in charge, right? It's God, my husband, and my wife. Always put God first. You want to tell them and remind your family and friends and your community, the power of invitation comes from prayer, your prayer for them and their prayer for themselves. If they're not praying about discernment, then they're saying, God, tell me, but I'm too busy to listen, right? Get on your knees. I tell my vocation directors, and they are my vocation directors, they're like, well, my sons, right? You don't have to eat and you don't have to sleep, but you have to keep a daily holy hour. Why? Because if you're standing out on that plaza on Sunday and someone comes to you and says, Father, please pray for fill in the blank, or you're walking with a discerner and you're saying to him, you need to be praying about vocations, and you're not praying, they're going to see right through that. And a lot of times, and I want to emphasize this, these are good priests who are doing far too many jobs, right? The average vocation director out there is vocation director, he's pastor of 2 parishes, he's vicar for clergy. I mean, he's got multiple jobs and he's trying to figure out how to do it all. And I get that, but get on your knees first, Father. That's the most important thing, and God will figure out the rest of the day. Accompany them without hijacking their vocation. This is a tough one for us. If you're a control person like I am, right? You always want to, like, you're a fixer. Oh, I know exactly what you should do in life. I know how you should accomplish it. I know what school you should go to. I know blah, 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 blah. No. Invite them, support them, but get out of the way, all right? Help them to ask the right questions. Help them understand to say, it's okay to say to God, God, I want to know what you want me to do in my life. I'm not sure I want to say yes. God's big enough. He can handle that. They need to know that. They need to know that they can say to God, show me, help me better understand. Giving up one's own comfort to devote time to others. We are in a society that is all about me. It's all about what makes my life better. It's all about what makes me feel better. And that feeling of happiness and peacefulness and blah, 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 blah. Well, you know what? It's not about me. It was never supposed to be about me. That is why in the 10 Commandments, God calls us to come together to celebrate the Eucharist with him, right? Keep holy the Sabbath. If God didn't think there was a value in us being together, he would say, well, go on your own and just think about me every now and then. No, it's about being with one another, supporting and walking with one another. You are not called to be with them on the entire journey. And this is hard for some people. I have had the privilege for many, many years in the work that I've done to know men as they were discerning, do their paperwork for seminary, know them as seminarians, see them then go on to become priests. And I now know two of them as bishop. All right. So most people don't get to see that. The people, and I don't think you've ever stopped to think about this, the people in your local seminary did not know them as discerners. The people in the vocation office, depending on how the vocation office is set up, they're not on the formation team of the seminary. So they see them as discerners, and yes, of course, they'll see them at ordination, but they don't see them every day at the seminary. So you are only called to be with them on part of their journey. Family and vocations, and I'm just being conscious of my time here. So we all heard the phrase, vocations do not come from trees, they come from families, right? This is my family. Missing we have a new one, Eloise Marie, who's not in that photo, but you know, I think this is important. I need to say this out loud. And some of you may be shocked and scandalized. We are not the family, or we were not the family, who was the poster family for vocations. My husband and I got married. He was Lutheran and he was not practicing. My father-in-law was Catholic. My mother-in-law was Lutheran. He made his sacraments in the Lutheran faith, but he didn't really follow his faith until we had our children. And then he became the best non-Catholic in the third pew, okay? You know, he ran the Christmas tree sale and he was helping with the altar service, but he wasn't even Catholic. I went to Catholic school, 16 years of Catholic school. My kids went to Catholic school, most of them to Catholic universities, but we didn't have the chance to pray the rosary every day as a family or to go over the readings every day as a family. And why am I saying that? It's important for you to say that to people. I have parents who call me. I had a mother call me once, very upset. Her son was going into seminary, and she said, I don't know what a novena is. I don't know what the devotions are. I'm going to embarrass him. And I tried to make her laugh and say, we have them in seminary for 5 years because they don't know when to sit, stand, kneel, or pray either, right? You have to lessen that fear of parents and sisters and siblings to say, it's okay. You don't have to be that poster child family. So it's talking about the what ifs that no one wants to talk about. So what if I make a mistake? What if I call Father, Joe and say, I think Bob would make a great seminarian, and then he goes through the process and the bishop's like, I don't think God's calling him to be a priest. What if Bob gets accepted into the discernment program, and I am the diocesan vocation director, and it's my job to have a very narrow portal, and I say to the bishop in prayer and discernment, I think this man's called to seminary, and he gets to seminary and it doesn't work out. What happens if Bob is a great guy and he does all the right steps while he's in seminary and then he leaves? Is this a failure? No, it is not. Absolutely not. God calls a lot of men to seminary. He doesn't call them all to ordination. And it's not up to you or me to decide why God called that man to seminary. And if you make a mistake, and this is very important for my vocation directors and for you as Serrans to hear this, if you say, in my heart in prayer, I don't think God is calling that man to priesthood or this woman to religious life, and perhaps God actually was, no, you did what you thought was best in prayer and discernment. That is the job of the Holy Spirit. They will pick that person up and make sure they land where they're intended to land with the Lord. All right. So if I can just get to this last one, bear with me. Technical issues, it's always the way, right? Here we go. So I just want to end with this beautiful video from Father Barron, Bishop Barron rather. He ordained the Dominicans just before the pandemic, and it really sums up the beauty of priesthood.
Brother brothers, Venerable Fulton Sheen said that every priest is a Jacob's ladder. That is to say, someone who connects heaven and earth. You must be able to travel down far enough to reach even the most lost of the lost. And you must be able at the same time to reach up high enough to facilitate the journey to heaven. As priests, you will sanctify. As prophets, you will teach. As kings, you will shepherd and govern. Brothers, you will be bridges that others might climb on you to God. You will be priests so that your people might hear the saving truth. You will be kings that your people might walk the path of salvation. So, brothers, love the people you serve. Sanctify them. Teach them. Shepherd them. Be a Jacob's ladder for them.
I just want to end by saying that man doesn't get to lay prostrate on the ground of the cathedral floor without the help of Serra. I'm not saying this because I'm on a video call with Serrans. I'm saying this because what you do and how you support your local priests is so monumental. The financial support, yeah, that goes a long way, especially for our priests and mission dioceses, all right? The work that the Serra Foundation has done with NCDVD as an overarching organization, the resources that we have put out, booklets that we have put out, we would not have been, listen to me, we would not have been able to do it without your help. The prayerful support, the fraternal support, that all goes into it. The Serra Spark initiative, which I know Anne's going to talk to you about, in recent history is one of the single most important things that Serra has offered the Catholic Church. Why? You are helping men who stay in this ministry for approximately 5 years before the next guy comes through the revolving door and has to learn about vocations all over again, how not to reinvent the wheel. You're giving them the tools that you not only know by heart because it's your programming. You know what works, you know what doesn't work in certain, this part of the country, this is really great. In this part of the country, maybe not so much. They have so much to do, so much to learn, so much on their shoulders, both spiritually and prayerfully, and not just in the world of vocations, because remember, they are priests first and always. So I just want to thank you and hope you understand the power of your prayer and the power of your support. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Rose. What a wonderful, wonderful message you had for us today. Before we get to some questions, and we have a couple of out there, but before we get to your questions, I want to let everyone know that Rose's comments, as well as this entire meeting, are being recorded and will be available to you on YouTube shortly after this meeting. It will be featured on the Serra YouTube channel. Also, the Always Forward publication and the U.S. Council website will also have the links to it as well. Now, there was a question, or maybe a question, maybe a comment. Someone would like to know if we could get at least, though you had 3 documents there that you had said that were very interesting, a little hard to read. But one was vocation vocabulary, the other one was how to become a priest, brother, or sister, and the other was the difference between sister and nun. And those seem to be PDF publications, and I was just wondering if we could get those to our Chicago office and that John could send them out in one of the upcoming Always Forward. So I wonder if we could do that, Rose.
Absolutely. I will get those out to John later on today.
Very good. Those look like wonderful, wonderful documents. Those are some takeaways. And also, people, obviously, we're not going to have a printed script of what you had talked about, but people can use this recording at their meetings.
Absolutely.
And just bring it up on the YouTube channel and let it go. It'll be wonderful. I have a couple of other things here. And I don't know if you can answer this, but it is more of a, probably takes books to answer, but how can we better counter the rise among youth to the message of atheism and humanism? Do you have any comments on that, Rose?
Well, as this is not an academic symposium,
I
I
know.
would say a non-theological answer and a mother's answer would be better. The best way is by witness. What we do not do well as a Catholic Church is speak about the beauty of our faith. We've often heard the phrase "fishers of men," and Bishop Caggiano from Bridgeport has a great phrase. He's like, "You're not to the priest. You're not meant to be fishers of men only, but you're certainly not meant to be keepers of the aquarium, right? Meaning, get out beyond the boundary of your parish." We as a Catholic society fear having conversations with young people who want to hit that red button issue, right? Like, I'm sure we can all equate to that, like, oh, please just don't bring that up today. I just don't want to talk about the gay marriage issue. I don't want to talk about, abortion issue. I don't want to talk about Eucharistic coherence, right? Why? Why don't you? I'm not asking you to start the fight in the street square, but why are you not comfortable? You don't need to be a theologian. You don't need to have a PhD. You just need to be comfortable in speaking about your faith and talking about it and say, it's okay. You know what? I wish I had a better answer. I'm going to get a better answer. And I'm going to call my parish priest or somebody, and I'm going to get back to you on that. That's what you need to be able to start to do. Have those conversations, push back ever so gently. We are known in my family, my extended family, we're known as the moral compass, right? If the Sullivan family is not going to do it, we probably should rethink it. Are you the moral compass? And we by no means are we the moral compass. I don't mean to say that, but are you the moral compass in your family and friends? Do you practice what you preach?
Okay, very good. One other question. We only have time for one more. I'm sorry, but what do you see as the biggest challenge for new or even experienced vocation directors?
That's a good question. It's information overload. Overload. First, they will do deep breathing exercises and wonder, what did I do that my bishop made me the vocation director of the diocese? Because there's only one vocation director in the diocese. You need to learn, just if I can use a very raw word, the mechanics of the job, right? Like, what do you know about US immigration? Check that box. Nothing, probably. What do you know about psychology and the value of testing? And check that box. I really probably don't know anything. What do you know about background checks, criminal background checks? Yeah, that's another box I don't know. What do you say to a parent whose son is discerning? What don't you say to a parent whose son is discerning? And the answer is, by the way, don't come in on a white charger horse, acting as though you know the very best thing for her son, because she's going to say, where were you when he was 18 and he was struggling in school, right? So they're learning all of that, but at the same time, they are continuing to learn how to be the best priest they can be for you on the parish level. And that is where the support of Serra comes through, Dick, with NCDVD, because we don't let them hang out there by themselves. We always say to them, you're not alone. We're doing this together.
Okay, very good. Well, thank you so much, Rose, for spending time with us today. And we will be seeing you in Minneapolis very shortly. I'm sorry to say sooner than we want, because that means summer will be coming towards an end anyway. So
Well, thank
anyway.
you. You're all in my prayers.